I'm very excited for today's video because it's a format that you guys seemed to really enjoy last time, and now I have a few more years life experience under my belt, so it's definitely time for part 2 of my L mount lens tier list, featuring all of the lenses that I missed last time. Okay, so getting straight into it, here is the tier list, part 2. As you guys can see, we have the exact same categories along the left-hand side, and we have all of our lenses lined up at the bottom based on the brand. So starting with the Lumix lenses, the Sigma lenses, and then the Meike, Samyang, Leica, and so on. So let's just go from left to right, starting with the Lumix 100mm macro. And we're starting off pretty strong here, I'd say, because I absolutely adore this lens. It's one of the lenses that I use the most for filming B-roll, and it's also a design feat in of itself, considering I think it's the world's smallest one-to-one macro lens for a full-frame camera, in the sense that it shares the exact same size and form factor as the other S1.8 primes. Now, it's only an F2.8, but for anyone that's ever shot macro before, you'll know that realistically you need to have a higher f-stop to get the most in focus, to make the macro effect look the best. So it being a 2.8 isn't really a downside for me at all. So I'm going to put this lens straight away in God tier. Let's start off positive. Well, hey, and then we're going straight into the Lumix 26mm f8. So maybe not starting off as positive as I thought. So I really enjoy using this lens, and upon my initial review of the lens, I said that I really did enjoy using it, and that's the truth. However, in a more recent video, I said that I would not recommend it. I've got a really weird relationship with this one, to be honest, because while I think it's a really fun and quirky lens, I do think it's incredibly overpriced. So for that reason, I am going to put it in would not recommend. But that's not to say that it doesn't take really good images, and I'll put some up on the screen now if you want to see. But yeah, anyway, moving on to the Lumix 50mm f1.4 S Pro. And this one's going to conflict me slightly because on one hand, I think it's probably the best L mount lens I've ever tried. Optically, it is absolutely insane. It just has a quality to it that I've not found in any other lens that I've tried. But it also weighs a metric ton. I mean, it's a big boy lens, and if anyone knows me, I'm not someone that enjoys bigger lenses. So it's tough. It's definitely going to be somewhere between fantastic and God tier. I think I'm going to put it in God tier for now just because of its optical performance, but that could be subject to change somewhere down the line. Okay, and now moving on to the Lumix 18-40. So this is a really interesting lens that I genuinely feel like Lumix released a little bit too late, if I'm being honest. If it was released at the exact same time as the Lumix S9 instead of the 26mm f8, I could have seen both the lens and the camera getting way more love on its initial announcement. That being said, we got it a few months afterwards, and I've tested it a few times. I have one here now in the office, and I do really enjoy it. It's super compact and it's super lightweight, so it really does suit the Lumix S9 down to a T. That being said, it's definitely not a God tier lens because of the variable aperture. It's f4.5 to f6.3, I believe. And sometimes I've found that f-stop creeping up to actually sort of get in my way a little bit, especially when I'm shooting outdoors and it's getting darker. So I'm going to go ahead and put this lens in the would recommend category. The size and weight definitely is its biggest plus side. And, you know, optically it is very sharp too. Okay, and now moving on to the Lumix 28-200, f4 to f7, try and say that again, Josh, the f4 to f7.1. I am putting this lens straight up here in God tier, and I'll tell you why. This lens, despite the variable aperture, is easily one of the most versatile small lenses that I've ever used. It may not be my first choice for paid or corporate work or anything like that because of the variable aperture, but as a travel lens, you literally can't beat it. Having 28 to 200mm in such a small form factor is genuinely a godsend, and even though f7.1 does feel a bit narrow at 200mm, you're still getting the compression at 200mm, so you can still get some separation between the subject and the background. I genuinely think it's a really really, really well designed lens, and it's definitely slept on way too much. If I'm going traveling anytime soon, then you can bet your bottom dollar that that lens is coming with me. So it's definitely God tier, at least for the way that I like to shoot, because it does what it's designed to do. It's a travel lens and it does that extremely well. Okay, the Lumix 24-70 f2.8 S Pro. Oh man, I feel like I'm being way too kind to Lumix right now. I may actually have to do some moving around because now I'm thinking about it, I'm putting literally everything in the top tier. Me having a bias towards Lumix? Don't know what you're talking about. The Lumix 24-70 S Pro, I'm going to put in the fantastic tier. Image quality wise, it's definitely God tier. It's the best 24-70 I have ever used for the L mount. In my opinion, it's better than the Sigma Art 24-70, and I've not actually tested the Leica 24-70, unfortunately, but I wouldn't be surprised if optically they're very similar. The reason why it's not going in God tier though, is just down to its size. I feel like a lot of the other 24-70 variants for the L mount are much smaller and much lighter, which makes me want to bring them out more and shoot with them more. The Lumix 24-70 I normally use in the studio, so when I'm filming YouTube videos, and in fact it's one of my most used lenses for shooting B-roll because again the optical performance is incredible and you can actually get quite close with it too, which is really nice. But it's the size that just stops me from giving it my top recommendation. And that's it. Maybe it'll change, we'll see. So the only lens that made it into part 2 that was also in my part 1 of the L mount tier list is the next one, which is the Lumix 70-200 f2.8 S Pro. And the reason why I've decided to include it in part 2 is because I feel like I was actually quite harsh to this lens upon my initial review of it. I did say that optically it's fantastic, and I stand by the fact that it's probably one of the sharpest, optically supreme lenses that I've tried for the L mount, but the reason why I put it in the meh category before was down to its size and weight. And the reason why I want to try and maybe sort of rethink it for this tier list is because it's a telephoto lens, and I was being kind of harsh given that it is a telephoto lens, which historically are always bigger, especially if you're shooting with a full frame camera. So for that reason, I'm going to put this lens up to would recommend. I'm not putting it in fantastic, even though it is one of the best lenses I've used optically, purely because I do feel like it is a little bit too big for me personally to bring out with me. For example, I go to South Africa quite a lot because my fiance is from there, and we go on game drives and all that sort of stuff quite often. And I always find myself bringing lighter lenses with me, let's say the 70-200 F4 S Pro or the 70-300, just because they're more manageable to travel with. I just can't see myself bringing that 70-200 f2.8 on a plane with me, and therefore I can't give it my fantastic recommendation. But I can put it in would recommend, and I feel bad for putting it in meh beforehand. The next lens is the Lumix 14-28 f4 to f5.6, and this is actually the only Lumix lens that has been released recently that I haven't tested. I don't know if you guys realized, but I didn't get one upon its announcement. I didn't make a review video on it, and still to this day I have not touched one with my own two little grubby mitts. So I can't really rank this lens based on my own experience. I can only rate this lens based on what I've heard about it and what I've seen online. One of my biggest issues with Lumix at the moment is that they're putting too much energy into making variable aperture zooms. And while I've, given some of their variable aperture zooms a very nice ranking on this tier list because they're great lenses, I feel like they could spend a little bit more time giving us f2.8 constant zooms or something similar so that the professional shooters have something to use as well. And the 14-28, it fits in its own category, I guess, because it is so wide. But I guess a variable aperture sort of aspect of it makes it a little bit less desirable. I think I'm going to put the 14-28 for now in would recommend, which is the middle ground, and basically only on the basis that I haven't tested it myself, and therefore I can't, demote it anymore and I can't raise it up anymore without actually having a personal experience using it. So it's going to stay in the middle. If anyone did want a comprehensive review of the 14-28, then do let me know and I'll get in touch with Lumix to see if I can get a unit in for testing. So now we are on to the Sigma lenses, starting with the 24-70 Mark II that they released, I don't know, what was it now? A couple months ago maybe? I really like this lens. I think that it blends a lot of really good characteristics together, at least characteristics that I want to see in a lens myself. They managed to shave down the weight compared to the Mark I version, albeit it wasn't that much, but they did, and that's nice. They also made it slightly more compact, again, which is really nice. And because it's an art series lens, it has that fantastic declickable aperture ring that I absolutely adore with all of the Sigma art series lenses. That being said, it doesn't give me as much wow as the 24-70 S Pro does, but because it's much lighter, I'd probably be more inclined to bring it out with me. And this is where, you know, my sort of 3 elements of consideration come in, because a lens can be optically fantastic, but if I'm not bringing it with me, then what's the point? And if a lens is too heavy and too big, so much so that I don't want to bring it, then the optical performance is really null and void. So I am going to put this lens in fantastic because I feel like Sigma did a good job of innovating a lens they'd already released and just making it marginally better, so much so that someone who is looking for that sort of standard that standard zoom range could get something that is manageable to pack in your bag and bring everywhere. So I like that about that lens. And then moving on to the Sigma 28-45 f1.8. So you guys don't know this, but Sigma actually sent me that lens to test and I never made an embargo review on it. Essentially, the 28-45 was Sigma's response to one of the most popular lenses they ever made in the APS-C format, and that was the 18-35 f1.8. So they thought they'd make one for a full frame camera, and lo and behold, we got the 28-45. And, you know, the actual focal range you get on a full frame equivalent sensor is roughly the same. And they did a really good job. Optically, it's fantastic. It's built extremely well. But the only issue, in my opinion, is that the focal range in of itself is actually quite small. And also it was a really heavy lens. But, you know, again, to play devil's advocate, you've essentially got prime lenses everywhere between 28 to 45 millimeters in one lens. So that essentially mitigates the need for you to bring a 24 millimeter prime, a 35 millimeter prime, and probably a 50 millimeter prime as well. So there's also that to contend with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it here in the would recommend pile. But I was definitely impressed with it, as I am normally with most Sigma lenses. But yeah, it's just the size and the limited sort of focal range that keeps it from being incredible for me. And I know I'm going to get some people in the comments saying, well, in order to be an f1.8, it needs to be large, it needs to be heavy. I understand that. I'm not an idiot. I'm just giving you my opinion. Okay, cool. Let's move on. So the 50mm f1.2 from Sigma. For anyone that's aware, we have like, I don't know, a million different 50mm primes available for the L mount. We have the 50mm f1.4 from Sigma. We have the 50mm f1.2. We have the 50mm f1.4 from Lumix, the 50mm f1.8 from Lumix. We have the 50mm f2, the Meike 50mm f1.8. We just have literally 50mm primes coming out of our arse. And I don't know why every company loves making 50mm, but they just do. And I guess that's cool. The one really cool thing about this one though, is that it's actually the fastest prime lens that's ever been made for the L mount. And I'm talking full frame with autofocus. There's no other lenses that I know of that have autofocus that go down to f1.2. And for that reason, I think that this lens deserves a lot of credit. Also, it's quite a compact lens for, you know, an f1.2. It's actually quite small. So that's 2 big pluses for me, considering that it can work great in low light conditions and it also doesn't weigh too much. So for that reason, I'm actually going to be really nice and put this lens in God tier, because I do feel like Sigma as a brand are probably innovating the most in terms of lenses in the L mount space. They just seem to be doing stuff that no other brand is thinking about doing, and they definitely have a lot more R&D in their lens manufacturing. So Yeah, that's really nice to see, and I think at least one Sigma lens deserves to be in my God tier category. Oh, well, now comes one of my favorite Sigma lenses ever made, and that is a Sigma 28-105 f2.8. I still have it here, and it's currently attached to my Lumix S5 II. I mean, I'm beating a dead horse here. You guys know this. I'm not a fan of big, heavy lenses, but this is my exception. The 28-105 is such a versatile lens, and it also has a really, really decent minimum focus distance of around 40 centimeters, and that's across the entire focal range, so from 28mm all the way up to 105mm. So that really makes this lens super useful for a multitude of different scenarios. And even though it is big and it is heavy, I feel like I can bring this one lens out with me and basically do everything that I'd ever need to do on a paid shoot, and that is extremely nice. I also love the fact that it has a declickable aperture ring. You know, it's got all of the nice build quality aspects that you normally get with an art series lens. So I am going to also put this Sigma lens in God tier. I genuinely think they've done a fantastic job at making a lens that basically suits everything. And even though it's at the cost of, you know, weight and size, I think I can forgive that based on how versatile it is. Okay, now moving on to another big boy lens, and this is the Sigma 150-600 f5 f6.3. I made a boo-boo here. I actually meant the 60-600 f4.5 f6.3 from Sigma. So keep that in mind. Okay, moving on. Again, this is another lens that Sigma sent out to me that I never made a review of, and I should have. If I'm being honest, I was getting kind of frustrated with how the thumbnail looked and just decided to bin the whole project. In hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I actually took this lens with me to go watch an F1.3 practice. What was it? Maybe 2 years ago now. It was a while ago. And I really, really enjoyed using it. I was able to get some really nice images using that lens, and the focal range of 150-600 is incredible for sports, for wildlife, and, you know, every other aspect where you may need to get a little bit closer. The big downside, of course, is how bloody big it is. It is absolutely gargantuan. Like, it weighs so much, and bringing it around Silverstone for the entire day was definitely quite tiring. But that being said, it is a telephoto lens. It's 600mm on a full frame sensor. So what do you expect, Josh? Am I right? I know. So what I think I'm going to do is put this lens in the would recommend category. I don't do enough sports or wildlife shooting to really use a telephoto lens on a regular basis. So realistically, I'm not really the best person to ask or compare when it comes to telephoto lenses. There's definitely people out there that do that sort of photography or that sort of work way, way more, and therefore probably have more opinions to say about lenses like this. But I would definitely recommend it if you needed a large, heavy lens that will get you 600mm. It does that fantastically. I can't really complain, to be honest. Next up, we have the Sigma 45mm f2.8 from that little metal contemporary physical aperture ring I-series of lenses. The 45mm f2.8 I've actually used a number of times, and I still have it now attached to my Lumix S9. It makes for a fantastic pairing with that camera, man. I mean, it is so nice to use with the S9. The size and weight really complements that small sized camera, and having that physical aperture ring is also really nice for street photography. I think that optically it's very, very sharp. For video, I probably wouldn't use it, to be honest, because I do think the focus breathing on all of those I-series lenses isn't the best, and generally speaking as well, I don't think the autofocus performance is up to scratch when comparing it to the 1.8 S series primes. But for its size, for its weight, and for the application, I do really enjoy using this lens. So therefore, I am going to put it in the fantastic category. Okay, so now we have landed on the cheapest lens I've ever tested for the L mount that has autofocus, and that is the Meike 50mm f1.8. this lens will only cost you $169, which is absolutely insane for a 1.8 prime for a full frame camera that also has autofocus. Granted, it's an STM motor, so it's nothing groundbreaking by any means. It's actually quite old tech now, but to have something like that at that price point is genuinely really nice, especially if you are just getting into the L mount and you want a lens that won't cost you loads of money. So for the price point alone, I am going to put this lens in the fantastic category because I feel like the L mount definitely needs more of this. We need more beginner or cheap lenses so that anyone that's buying into the L mount for the first time doesn't feel overwhelmed with all of the pro end options or, you know, everything that costs over £1,000. Cool. So the Meike 85mm f1.4, another lens that I tested quite recently. Again, super cheap. I think this one is sub $400 or around that price point. But for an 85mm prime that goes the whole way down to f1.4, and again, with pretty decent autofocus, that's a steal. Like, it's really, really good. And it also has a physical aperture ring, which I really enjoyed. That's something you normally don't see in cheaper lenses. Build quality as well was pretty decent. I have nothing to complain about, you know, in that regard. You know what? I think based on everything that I just said about the 50mm f1.8 from Meike, I'm also going to put this one in the fantastic because we do need more cheap lenses for the L mount. I think that's a given, and anyone that's giving that to us and also making pretty decent quality lenses while they're giving us cheaper options, I think that's commendable and that definitely deserves some recognition. The second to last lens on this tier list is the Samyang 35 to 150mm f2 to f2.8, which stands to be the only L mount lens that Samyang have made so far for the L mount, and that's kind of disappointing when you consider this lens came out quite some time ago now. I'll tell you what's also quite disappointing is the fact that I have tried to get in touch with Samyang's marketing department via email, via Instagram, via Facebook. You know, I'm basically everything short of sending a pigeon to Samyang at this point, and they have not got back to me. They have not responded on any of those platforms or any of those mediums, and this pisses me off a little bit, if I'm being honest. Now, I don't want to be big-headed here and make it sound like, oh, you know, I've got a channel and therefore I deserve to try every single new lens, but it's more so that I get so many questions and DMs on various different platforms about L mount products, as you can imagine, and I get a lot of people asking me my thoughts on this Samyang lens. The issue is that I have not been able to get hold of one, so therefore I can't give anyone any feedback on what I think about it. And I think that's really, really bad of Samyang, to be honest, when you consider that this community is exclusively L mount, which means it's a captive audience for the people that would be interested in buying this lens. So I just think their whole sort of mentality on it is kind of backwards in my opinion. And yeah, I still haven't tested it. So because of the way that I have been treated, or I guess not been treated by Samyang, I'm going to put this lens in the meh category. I mean, this sort of gives you guys a good understanding of what that'd be like if you had any issues with the lens. I don't think their aftermarket care is going to be very good if they can't get in touch with someone like me, or at least respond to my request to essentially help them sell more lenses. That's all I'm trying to do here. It's only going to benefit them, and I'm giving myself more work. So yeah, they can go in my meh category. So the last lens on this part 2 of my L mount tier list video is the Leica 28mm APO Summicron. And for anyone that saw my recent video, which was L mount gear that I wouldn't recommend, you'll know that I basically bundled every single APO Summicron into my would not recommend list. And there's very good reason for that. Now, I haven't actually tested every single APO Summicron lens, unfortunately. I have only tested the 28mm extensively, and I've also had some hands-on experience with the 50mm as well. Those are the only two I've actually been hands-on with, but the 28mm is the only one I can conclusively say I have fully tested. The corner-to-corner sharpness, fantastic. The overall image quality, absolutely incredible. It's a Leica lens, you know, what do you expect? It's built like a tank, you know, it can definitely stand the test of time, all of that stuff. But the reason why I wouldn't recommend this lens, or at least I said that I wouldn't, is because of the ridiculous price point. It will cost you about £4,500 to own any of the APO Summicron lenses, and ultimately I just think that price to performance ratio is just a little bit skewed in my opinion. Personally, I feel like the S Pro lenses from Lumix do a fantastic job, and they're way cheaper, and I feel like you're just paying for the brand name at that point, not actually the optical sort of upsides that the APO Summicron lenses may give you. So for that reason, I'm going to put this in the meh category, but not the would not recommend. Oh, actually, fuck it, I'm putting it in the I'm putting it in the would not recommend category. I feel like I spend a lot of time bullying Leica, and it's not because I dislike the brand. In fact, I'm a massive Leica fan. I spent a lot of time daydreaming about owning a Leica, and at one point I did actually own the SL2S, and it was a really, you know, nice camera to use, ergonomically fantastic, build quality out of this world, better than anything else I've used. But I just feel like the modern Leica stuff has such a high amount of red dot tax on it. And if I'm being honest, I also feel like modern Leica equipment has almost lost its soul. The older Leica M series cameras, they were really where that Leica experience was at, in my opinion. That's where they sort of reached their pinnacle. And I do feel like right now the brand is dwindling somewhat because they can't keep up with the technological advancements. Let's try saying that again, because they can't keep up with the technological advancements in the industry, and are instead just creating products, in my opinion, just for the sake of it. They're only giving you a luxury alternative to everything else that's already out there. So unless you're buying it purely for build quality purposes, I don't really get the point, to be honest. So yeah. So looking at the decisions that I made for this part 2 L-mount tier list video, I've definitely been a lot kinder this time around than I was in part 1. But to be honest, I think it's for good reason. I feel like a lot of the L-mount contributors, or the members of the L-mount Alliance, whatever you want to call them, I feel like they've released a lot of really good lenses in the last 2 years. And they've also given us a lot more options for, you know, professional work, and also for the lower end hobbyist enthusiasts as well. You know, while there's still going to be some gaps in the L-mount lineup, for example, we still need faster prime lenses, like a set of F1.4 primes from Lumix would be lovely, maybe some more compact primes as well for the S9 and so on and so forth. I do feel like the L-mount ecosystem is developing nicely now, and it's just good to see new lenses from each of these brands. If there's any lenses that I've missed out in this part 2 of the L-mount tier list, then do let me know in the comments. Although I do feel like I've covered every single lens that I get a lot of questions about, and also the more modern lenses that weren't out at the time I made the first video. So I could be wrong though, I might have missed 1 or 2 lenses, so do definitely let me know. I really do hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts down below, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.